In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you to the Friday edition of the Spook Zone. Ain't it wacky? I'm going camping on Saturday, so I thought, hey, this seems like a good time to do the show. You know, when I can actually get it done, because I've been away for the last 2 weeks, and I've been slacking off. So, need to fix that. Need to make sure that I'm actually reading things. And I am going to be reading things today. Firstly, a sample from the commemorative edition of the Necronomicon, the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft. Here's how loud it is. Loud. Good. I like how loud it is. It makes me feel powerful. It doesn't actually. It makes me scared of the book. It means that if it lands on me, I will get hurt. And we will also have a little story from the internet, a good one that I picked out specifically. I didn't, but I found one. So we won't be spending 10 minutes searching for a story and then me getting oh my god, where's the story? Meh. We found one. We'll be reading it. It'll be great. People will enjoy themselves. It'll be fun. So yeah, what's on the agenda today for Lovecraft? A little more than one-part story. So similar to Herbert West, we're going to be doing a little thing where for the upcoming episodes, I'm going to be reading excerpts from this. This being The Lurking Fear, a story about God knows what. Probably a lurking fear of some kind in a man. Probably something to do with eldritch abominations, terrible, terrible things that are just happening around him. Who knows? We'll find out. Either way, we'll be reading that for about 30 minutes, and then once I'm done with that, we'll be doing a little bit of internet stories, and they're always great. Anyway, without any further ado, I'm just going to get right into it, get into the groove of things, and begin the story of The Lurking Fear. Chapter 1. The Shadow on the Chimney. There was thunder in the air. On the night, I went to the deserted mansion atop Tempest Mountain to find the lurking fear. I wasn't alone, for foolhardiness was not then mixed with that love of the grotesque and the terrible which has made my career a series of quests for strange horrors in literature and in life. With me were 2 faithful and muscular men, for whom I had sent when the time came. Men long associated with me in my ghastly explorations because of their peculiar fitness. We had started quietly from the village because of the reporters, who still lingered about after the eldritch panic of a month before. The nightmare creeping death. Later I thought they might aid me, but I did not want them then. Would to God I had let them share the search, that I might not have to bear the secret alone so long, to bear it alone, for fear the world would call me mad, or go mad itself for the demon implications of the thing. Now that I'm telling it, anyway, lest the brooding make me manic, I wish I had never concealed it. For I, and I only, know what manner of fear lurked on that spectral and desolate mountain. In a small motor car, we covered the miles of primeval forest, hill, until the wooded ascent checked it. The country bore an aspect more than unusually sinister, as we viewed it by night and without the accustomed crowds of investigators, so that we were often tempted to use the Eccleston headlight, despite the attention it might attract. It was not a wholesome landscape after dark, and I believed I would have noticed its morbidity even had I been ignorant of the terror that stalked there. Of wild creatures there were none. They are wise when death leers close. The ancient lightning-scarred trees seemed unnaturally large and twisted, and the other vegetation unnaturally thick and feverish, while curious mounds and hummocks in the weedy, phlegorite pitted earth reminded me of snakes and dead men's skulls, swelled to gigantic proportions. Fear had lurked on Tempest Mountain for more than a century. This I learned once from a newspaper account of the catastrophe which first brought the region into world's notice. The place is a remote, lonely elevation in that part of Catskills, where Dutch civilization once feebly and transiently penetrated, leaving behind as it receded only a few ruined mansions and a degenerate squatter population inhabiting pitiful hamlets on isolated slopes. Normal beings seldom visited the locality, till the state police were formed, and even now only infrequent troopers patrol it. The fear, however, is an old tradition throughout the neighbouring villages, since it is a prime topic in the simple discourse of the poor mongrels who sometimes leave their valleys to trade hand-woven baskets for such primitive necessities as they cannot shoot, raise, or make. The lurking fear dwelt in the shunned and deserted Martinese mansion, which crowned the high but gradual eminence whose liability to frequent thunderstorms gave it the name of Tempest Mountain. For over 100 years, the antique grove-circled stone house had been the subject of stories incredibly wild and monstrously hideous. Stories of silent, colossal, creeping death which stalked abroad in summer. With whimpering insistence, the squatters told tales of a demon which seized lone wayfarers after dark, either carrying them off or leaving them in a frightful state of gnawed dismemberment, whilst sometimes they whispered of blood trails towards the distant mansion. Some said the thunder called the lurking fear out of its habitation, while others said the thunder was its voice. No one outside the backwoods had ever believed these varying and conflicting stories with their incoherent, extravagant descriptions of the half-glimpsed fiend. Yet not a farmer or villager doubted that the Martinese mansion was ghoulishly haunted. Local history forbade such a doubt, although no ghostly evidence was ever found by such investigators as had visited the building after some especially vivid tale of squatters. Grandmothers told strange myths of the Martinese spectre, myths concerning the Martinese family itself, its queer hereditary dissimilarity of the eyes, its long and natural annals, and the murder which had caused it. The terror which brought me to the scene was a sudden and pertinent confirmation of the mountaineers' wildest legends. One summer night, after a thunderstorm of unprecedented violence, the countryside was aroused by a squatter stampede which no mere delusion could create. The pitiful throngs of natives shrieked and whined of the unnameable horror which had descended upon them, and they were not doubted. They had not seen it, but had heard such cries from one of their hamlets that they knew that a creeping death had come. In the morning, citizens and state troopers followed the shuddering mountaineers to the place where they said that death had come. Death, as indeed, there. The ground under one of the squatters' villages had caved in after a lightning stroke, destroying several of the malodorous shanties, but upon this property damage was superimposed an organic devastation, which paled it to insignificance. Of a possible 75 natives who had inhabited this spot, not one living specimen was visible. The disordered earth was covered with blood and human debris, bespeaking too vividly the ravages of demon teeth and talons. Yet no visible trail led away from the carnage. That some hideous animal must be the cause, everyone quickly agreed. Nor did they now receive the charge that some cryptic deaths formed merely the sordid murders common in decadent communities. That charge was revived only when about 25 of the estimated population were found missing from the dead. And even then, it was hard to explain the murder of 50 by half that number. But the fact remained that on a summer night, a bolt had come out of the heavens and left a dead village, whose corpses were horribly mangled, chewed, and clawed. The excited countryside immediately connected the horror with the haunted Martinez mansion. The localities were over 3 miles apart. The troopers were more skeptical, including the mansion only casually in their investigations, and dropping it altogether when they found it thoroughly deserted. Country and village people, however, canvassed the place with infinite care, overturning everything in the house, sounding ponds and brooks, beating down bushes, and ransacking the nearby forests. All was in vain. The death that had come had left no trace save destruction itself. By the second day of the search, the affair was fully treated by the newspapers, whose reporters overran Tempest Mountain. They described it in much detail, and with many interviews to elucidate the horror's history as told by local grandmams. I followed the accounts languidly at first, for I am a connoisseur in horrors, but after a week I detected an atmosphere which stirred me oddly, so that on August 5th, 1921, I registered among the reporters who crowded the hotel at Lefferts Corners, nearest village to Tempest Mountains, and acknowledged headquarters of the searchers. 3 weeks more, and the dispersal of the reporters left me free to begin a terrible exploration, based on the minute inquiries and surveying which I had meanwhile busied myself. So on this summer night, while distant thunder rumbled, I left a silent motorcar and tramped with 2 armed companions up the last mound-covered reaches of Tempest Mountain, casting the beams of electric torch on the spectral grey walls that began to appear through giant oaks ahead. In this morbid night, solitude and feeble, shifting illumination, the vast box-like pile displayed obscure hints of terror which day could not uncover. Yet I did not hesitate, since I had come with fierce resolution to test an idea. I believed that the thunder called the death demon out of some fearsome secret place, and, be that demon solid entry or vaporous pestilence, I meant to see it. I had thoroughly searched the ruin before, hence knew my plan well, choosing as the seat of my vigil the old room of Jean Martens, whose murder looms so great in rural legends. I felt subtly that the apartment of this ancient victim was best for my purposes. The chamber, measuring about 25 feet square, contained, like the other room, some rubbish which had once been furniture. It lay on the second story, on the southeast corner of the house, and had an immense east window and narrow south window, both devoid of panes and shutters. Opposite the large window was an enormous Dutch fireplace with scriptural tiles representing the prodigal son, and opposite the narrow window was a spacious bed built into the wall. As the tree-muffled thunder grew louder, I arranged my plan's details. First, I fastened side by side to the ledge of the large window 3 rope ladders which I had brought with me. I knew they reached a suitable spot on the grass outside, for I had tested them. Then, the 3 of us dragged from another room a wide 4-poster bedstead, crowding it laterally against the window. Having strewed it with fir boughs, all now rested on it, with drawn automatics, 2 relaxing while the 3rd watched. From whatever direction the demon might come, a potential escape was provided. If it came from within the house, we had the window ladders, if from outside, the door and the stairs. We did not think, judging from precedent, that it would pursue us, far even at worst. I watched from midnight to 1 o'clock, when, in spite of the sinister house, the unprotected window, and the approaching thunder and lightning, I felt singularly drowsy. I was between my two companions, George Bennett being towards the window and William Toby toward the fireplace. Bennett was asleep, having apparently felt the same anomalous drowsiness which affected me, so I designated Toby for the next watch, although even he was nodding. It is curious how intently I had been watching the fireplace. The increasing thunder must have affected my dreams, for in the brief time I slept there came to me apocalyptic visions. Once I partly awakened, probably because the sleeper toward the window had restlessly flung an arm across my chest. I was not sufficiently awake to see whether Toby was attending to his duties as a sentinel, but felt a distinct anxiety on that score. Never before had the presence of evil so poignantly oppressed me. Later, I must have dropped asleep again, for it was out of a phantasmal chaos that my mind leaped, when the night grew hideous, with shrieks beyond anything in my former experience or imagination. In the shrieking, the inmost soul of human fear and agony clawed hopelessly and insanely at the ebony gates of oblivion. I awoke to red madness and the mockery of diabolism, as farther and farther down inconceivable vistas that phobic and crystalline anguish retreated and reverberated. There was no light, but I knew from the empty space at my right that Toby was gone. God alone knew whither. Across my chest still lay the heavy arm of the sleeper at my left. Then came the devastating stroke of lightning, which shook the whole mountain, lit the darkest crypts of the hoary grove, and splintered the patriarch of the twisted trees. In the demon flash of a monstrous fireball, the sleeper started up suddenly, while the glare from beyond the window threw his shadow vividly upon the chimney atop the fireplace, from which my eyes had never strayed. That I am alive and sane is a marvel I cannot fathom. I cannot fathom it, for the shadow on that chimney was not of George Bennett or of any other human creature, but a blasphemous abnormality from hell's nethermost craters, a nameless, shapeless abomination which no mind could fully grasp and no pen even partly describe. In another second I was alone in the accursed mansion, shivering and gibbering. George Bennett and William Toby had left no trace, not even of a struggle. They were never heard from again. Chapter 2. A Passer in the Storm. For days after that hideous experience in the forest-swathed mansion, I lay nervously exhausted in my hotel room at Lefred's Corners. I do not remember exactly how I managed to reach the motor car, started, and slip unobserved back to the village, for I retain no distinct impression, save of a wild armed titan, trees, demonic mutterings of thunder, and Coronian shadows athwart the low mounds that dotted and streaked the region. As I shivered and brooded on the casting of that brain-blasting shadow, I knew that I had at last pried out one of the earth's supreme horrors, one of those nameless blights of outer voids whose faint demon scratchings we sometimes hear on the farthest rim of space, yet from which our own finite vision has given us merciful immunity. The shadow I had seen I hardly dared to analyze or identify. Something had lain between me and the window that night, but I shut it whenever I could not cast off the instinct to classify it. If only it had snarled or bayed or laughed titteringly, even that would have relieved the abysmal hideousness, but it was so silent. It had rested a heavy arm or foreleg on my chest. Obviously it was organic, or had been once organic. Jean Latence, whose room I had invaded, was buried in the graveyard near the mansion. I must find Bennett and Toby, if they lived. Why you picked them and left me for the last? Drowsiness is so stifling, dreams are so horrible. In a short time I realized that I must tell my story to someone or break down completely. I had already decided not to abandon the quest for the lurking fear, for in my rash ignorance it seemed to me uncertainty was worse than enlightenment, however terrible the latter might prove to be. Accordingly, I resolved in my mind that the best course to pursue, whom to select for my confidences, and how to track down the thing which had obliterated 2 men and cast a nightmare shadow. My chief acquaintances at Lafrette's Corners had been the affable reporters, of whom several had still remained to collect final echoes of the tragedy. It was from these that I determined to choose a colleague, and the more I reflected, the more my preference inclined toward one Arthur Munro, a dark, lean man of 35, whose education, taste, intelligence, and temperament all seemed to mark him as one not bound to conventional ideas and experiences. On an afternoon in early September, Arthur Munro listened to my story. I saw from the beginning that he was both interested and sympathetic, and when I had finished, he analyzed and discussed the thing with greater shrewdness and judgment. His advice, moreover, was eminently practical, for he recommended a postponement of operations at the Martinez mansion until we might come fortified with more detailed historical and geographical data. On his initiative, we combed the countryside for information regarding the terrible Martinez family, and discovered a man who possessed a marvelously illuminating ancestral diary. We also talked at length with such of the mountain mongrels as had not fled from the terror and confusion to remoter slopes, and arranged to proceed our culminating task with the exhaustive and definitive examination of spots associated with the various tragedies of squatter legend. The results of this examination were not at first very enlightening, though our tabulation of them seemed to reveal a fairly significant trend, namely, that the number of reported horrors was by far the greatest in areas either comparatively near the avoided house or connected with it by stretches of the morbidly nourished forest. There were, it is true, exceptions. Indeed, the horror which had caught the world's ear had happened in a treeless space, remote alike from the mansion and from any connecting woods. As to the nature and appearance of the lurking fear, nothing could be gained from the scared and witless shanty dwellers. In the same breath, they called it a snake and a giant, a thunder devil and a bat, a vulture and a walking tree. We did, however, deem ourselves justified in assuming that it was a living organism highly susceptible to electrical storms. And although certain of the stories suggested wings, we believed that its aversion for open spaces made land locomotion a more probable theory. The only thing really incompatible with the latter view was the rapidity with which the creature must have travelled in order to perform all the deeds attributed to it. When we came to know the squatters better, we found them curiously likable in many ways. Simple animals they were, gently descending the evolutionary scale because of their unfortunate ancestry and stultifying isolation. They feared outsiders, but slowly grew accustomed to us, finally helping vastly when we beat down all the thickets and tore out all the partitions of the mansion in our search for the lurking fear. When we asked them to help us find Bennett and Toby, they were truly distressed. For they wanted to help us, yet knew that these victims had gone as wholly out of the world as their own missing people. That great numbers of them had actually been killed and removed, just as the wild animals had long been exterminated. We, of course, thoroughly convinced. And we waited apprehensively for further tragedies to occur. By the middle of October, we were puzzled by a lack of progress. Owing to the clear nights of no demonic aggressions had taken place, and the completeness of our vain searches of house and country almost drove us to regard the lurking fear as a non-material agency. We feared that the cold weather would come on and halt our explorations, for all agreed that the demon was generally quiet in winter. Thus, there was a kind of haste and desperation in our last daylight canvass of the horror-visited hamlet. A hamlet now deserted because of the squatter's fears. The ill-fated squatter hamlet had borne no name, but long stood in a sheltered, though treeless cleft, between two elevations called respectively Cone Mountain and Maple Hill. It was closer to Maple Hill than to Cone Mountain, some of the crude abodes indeed being dugouts on the side of the former eminence. Geographically, it lay about 2 miles northwest of the base of Tempest Mountain, and 3 miles from the oak-girt mansion. Of the distance between the hamlet and the mansion, fully 2 miles and a quarter on the hamlet side was entirely open country, the plain being of fairly level character save for some of the low snake-like mounds, and having as vegetation only grass and scattered weeds. Considering this topography, we finally concluded that the demon must have come way by Cone Mountain, a wooded southern prolongation which ran to within a short distance of the westernmost spur of Tempest Mountain. The upheaval of ground we traced conclusively to a landslide from Maple Hill, a tall, lone, splintered tree on whose side had been the striking point of the thunderbolt, which summoned the fiend. As for the 20th time or more, Arthur Monroe and I went minutely over every inch of the violated village. We were filled with a certain discouragement, coupled with vague and novel fears. It was acutely uncanny, even when frightful and uncanny things were common, to encounter so blankly clueless a scene after such an overwhelming occurrence. And we moved about beneath the laden, darkening sky with that tragic, directionless zeal which results from a combined sense of futility and necessity of action. Our care was gravely minute. Every cottage was again entered, every hillside dugout again searched for bodies, and every thorny foot of adjacent slope again scanned for dens and caves, but all without result. And yet, as I have said, vague new fears hovered menacingly over us, as if a giant bat-winged griffin looked on transcosmic gulfs. As the afternoon advanced, it became increasingly difficult to see, and we heard the rumble of a thunderstorm gathering over Tempest Mountain. This sound in such a locality naturally stirred us, though less than it would have in the night. As it was, we hoped desperately that the storm would last until well after dark, and that hope turned from our aimless hillside toward the nearest inhabited hamlet to gather a body of squatters as helpers in the investigation. Timid as they were, a few of the younger men were sufficiently inspired by our protective leadership to promise such help. We had hardly more than turned, however, when there descended such a blinding sheet of torrential rain that shelter became imperative. The extreme, almost nocturnal darkness of the sky caused us to stumble badly, but guided by the frequent flashes of lightning and by our minute knowledge of the hamlet, we soon reached the least porous cabin on the lot. A heterogeneous combination of logs and boards whose still existing door and single tiny window both faced Maple Hill. Barring the door after us, against the fury of the wind and rain, we put in place the crude window shutter, which our frequent searches had taught us where to find. It was dismal, sitting there on rickety boxes in the pitchy darkness, but we smoked pipes and occasionally flashed our pocket lamps about. Now and then, we could see the lightning through cracks in the wall. The afternoon was so incredibly dark that each flash was extremely vivid. The stormy vigil reminded me shudderingly of my ghastly night upon Tempest Mountain. My mind turned to that odd question which I had kept recurring ever since the nightmare thing had happened, and again I wondered why the demon, approaching the three watchers either from the window or the interior, had begun with the men on each side and left the middleman till the last, when the Titan fireball had scared it away. Why had it not taken its victims in natural order, with myself second? From whichever direction it had approached, with what manner of far-reaching tentacles did it prey? Or did it know that I was the leader and saved me for a fate worse than that of my companions? In the midst of these reflections, as if dramatically arranged to intensify them, there fell nearby a terrific bolt of lightning, followed by the sound of sliding earth. At the same time, the wolfish wind rose to demonic crescendos of ululation. We were sure that one tree on Maple Hill had been struck again, and Monroe rose from his box and went to the tiny window to ascertain the damage. When he took down the shutter, the wind and the rain howled deafeningly in, so that I could not hear what he said, but I waited while he leaned out and tried to fathom nature's pandemonium. Gradually, a calming of the wind and dispersal of the unusual darkness told of the storm's passing. I had hoped it would last into the night and help our quest, but a furtive sunbeam from a knothole behind me removed the likelihood of such a thing, suggesting to Monroe that we had better get some light even if more showers came. I unbarred and opened the crude door. The ground outside was a singular mass of mud and pools, with fresh heaps of earth from the slight landslide. But I saw nothing to justify the interest which kept my companion silently leaning out the window. Crossing to where he leaned, I touched his shoulder, but he did not move. Then, as I playfully shook him and turned him around, I felt the strangling tendrils of a cancerous horror, whose roots reached into the illimitable pasts and fathomless abysms of the night that broods beyond time. For Arthur Monroe was dead, and on what remained of his chewed and gouged head, there was no longer a face. I like what you're doing here, Lovecraft, apart from that bit about calling the squatters lesser and evolutionary inferior. You gotta love it when Lovecraft decides to add some racism. It's good. But, despite my sarcasm, that's actually turning out to be something quite interesting. I'm actually keen to see where this goes. That'll be fun. So, we've got 2 more chapters, actually. So, next week, we'll be finishing this, hopefully, which is good, because it's not like a humongous thing like Herbert West Reanimator was, which was just this... it had a habit of repeating itself over and over again, which I think I can understand, because from what I know, Herbert West was released in sort of magazines at the time, so you had to buy the next one next week, and I'm assuming that Lovecraft was adding the sort of like retelling of the story, you know, in each new chapter, because it's in a new magazine. Unless he's just not being good at writing, which he occasionally steps into, briefly. But on that note, on that finishing note of finishing that story for now, we will go on to the internet. Yay, internet. So fun, so fresh, so funky, so terrible. Where we will be reading a story here and a story there. I don't know whether or not we're going to be able to get 2 stories done, because, hey, it's past, so we might do. But, on the off chance that we don't, hey, what do you know? This story is apparently going to be 10 minutes to read, so, you know what? There is a chance we can actually get 2 down. Maybe one long one and one short one. But we do not know until the time has been reached. So, before then, let's get on with it. This is Frogs Are Good Luck. By... who's this by? Alan Larkin. Cool. Thanks, Alan. You're a cool dude. Let's do this. I grew up in northern Nevada, and have always had a love for the macabre side of things. Interested in all ghost stories and the town's folklore, I often found myself searching for haunted locations around the city. All through high school, I never found one that was truly haunted, and it let me down. I began to think that there was nothing in the city that was weird enough for me, so after I left high school, I went to college in Washington in a town that I thought had much more history to it. I'd only learned about the real dark stories of my home when I came back to visit at the beginning of this summer. During vacation, I was working the summer at a sushi restaurant that had employed me for a few years before. I only really got the job because my friends were still working there too. I was up talking with the sushi crew, and they invited me to hang out on the North 5th and talk about life and probably smoke a little. North 5th is a street that leads, as you would guess, out the north side of town. If you follow the nicely paved road out of far enough, you will come across a cattle guard, and the pavement will give way to sand and dirt and rocks. The roads are lined with gnarled sagebrush, the kind that grows everywhere in Nevada, like a cancer. I felt like I hadn't seen my friends in ages, and I didn't want to spend the night indoors, so I agreed to go. Once the clock struck 9 p.m., all 5 of us busted our asses out of the restaurant and headed up 5th Street. My friend Liam and I were in his Jeep, following behind Jay, Austin, and Jay's girlfriend Danielle. We passed the cattle guard as we were following our friends, and Liam turned to me. I hope we don't go out too far. His eyes darted around his face, almost in a fit of paranoia. I had no idea what provoked that statement, but I felt it would lead to something terrifying. So I bit down and swallowed the bait. Why shouldn't we go out too far? Ghosts? I chuckled as I spoke, because I was a supernatural junkie. There isn't anything like the rush of encountering something that feels like it wasn't totally there. We waited in silence for a moment as I watched the weeds pass the Jeep while we got deeper and deeper into the desert. I'll never forget how my friend looked when he replied, like there was a history, like there was something out North 5th that Liam had run into before and never wanted to see again. I'll tell you later. His voice had turned cold. There was only fear present in his words. Why? I probably sounded angrier than I wanted. Admittedly, I was irritated and confused by Liam's dodgy attitude. They don't like it when you talk about them. My head was jumping from thought to thought. I was trying to delve into my subconscious and remember what my family and friends used to say about the desert. My brain never stopped thinking. I was coming up with all kinds of monsters in my head. After a while, I began to think that I wasn't going to get any sleep when I get home tonight. That was par for the course, though. As a matter of fact, my brain was often the cause of my sleep loss, and I hated it. Of course, if there wasn't a piece of me that loved the adrenaline from the supernatural, paranormal terror, I wouldn't be driving out to North 5th in the middle of the night to begin with. I seek it out. I love that feeling. I don't think I will anymore, though. A few minutes passed, and Liam spoke again. Just be respectful. We're coming out to smoke and talk. We won't be destroying anything. We should be gay. We should be okay. If we are just respectful. Liam's words confused the hell out of me, because I wanted to know what exactly it was he was talking about. Of course, he wouldn't tell me. I wanted to respect his fear as much as possible, even if I had to spend the next couple hours in blind confusion. We arrived at a clearing way out of town, and as we got to the car, I heard him mumbling about reservation land and coyotes. I was still confused, but out of respect to his fear and the realization that he didn't want to talk to me about it, I didn't say anything. The two of us met up with the three other friends, and they loaded their pipes as we began talking. Our conversation bounced from parties we'd been to, how life was for us now, how the restaurant was doing. We talked for maybe 30 minutes before Liam decided to speak up. He shivered when he did. Are we on reservation land? His body was so cold that his teeth were chattering. At least I hope that's what it was. He told me the next day that he was terrified and wanted to leave as soon as he asked that question. One of our friends, Austin, spoke up. I think so. Why? You're not supposed to be on tribal grounds. He was as confused as I was. Liam grabbed his hat and pushed down his scalp. Oh my God, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. Liam's face was hard to see under the black sky. The moon was cast behind thick, shadowy clouds. All we had to light our adventure was a handful of dim stars. Did you guys see any coyotes on the way here? It's important. He was leaning up against the door of his Jeep, almost as if it was holding him up. At this point, I was pretty freaked out too. I didn't know what was the matter, and he wouldn't tell me, so I was forced to sit in a cloud of confusion, which made me uneasy. Why? Came Jay's voice out of the driver's seat of his car. Wait. Is that frogs? Liam spoke up, more or less ignoring Jay's question. The rest of us sort of chuckled, but Liam got excited. He turned his ear away from us to get a better listen. No. Frogs are good luck. They keep the evil spirits away, he said, leaning off his car and now standing. The fear in him had subsided at least a little bit, and it seemed like he was enjoying the experience a little more. Are you talking about skinwalkers? Is that what you're afraid of? Austin let out a laugh, after figuring out what it was that Liam was so afraid of. As he spoke, the dreadlocks swung around his neck. I don't give a shit about the skinwalker. Don't worry, I'll kill every single one of them if they try and come and mess with us. Austin patted Liam on the shoulder, and the group fell silent, minus the sound of inhalation and the occasional lighter flick. After 10 or so minutes had passed, Jay and his girlfriend Danielle looked at the front of their car and turned the lights on. It wasn't strange, because Liam had been randomly turning his lights on when he couldn't handle being in the dark anymore. I mean, I was thankful, because I was growing more uneasy by the minute. I wanted to ask what exactly a skinwalker was, but I was sure that I didn't want to figure it out. After a while, Jay turned his lights on again, and we all shifted our attention to the front of his car after we heard him yelp. Standing in the road, about 30 feet ahead of us, was a single coyote. Its eyes were dark and unreflective, unlike the ways animals' eyes usually are. This one didn't reflect light from anywhere. As a matter of fact, they looked almost human. They would avoid emotion and staring at us. It wasn't a blank stare, there was intent in it. Liam and I screamed, but Austin remained quiet. Meanwhile, Jay and Danielle had tightened their grip on each other, and Jay was trying to keep Danielle calm. See, we all knew deep down what the skinwalkers were. We knew the stories. We've been hearing them since we were little kids. According to some people, if you find yourself on the Indian reservation land at night and are causing a ruckus, or just doing something that you aren't supposed to be doing, they will come out. They'll crawl from the shadows and peer over hilltops. They're subhuman and often come disguised as coyotes. Vengeful creatures. And the only way to know that you're really looking at one is to look into its eyes. They never look natural. The animal's eyes will look flat, like a human's. There will be very little gloss in them. I pulled in a breath and whispered to Liam, "We need to leave." I watched the coyote with him as he was nodding his head at me and opening his jeep door. I slid slowly from the side of Jay's car to the door of Liam's jeep. My eyes were fixed on the coyote's eyes, and it followed me. It was staring at me. Unblinking as I climbed into the vehicle. Before I broke eye contact, I could have sworn that I saw it smile. The sight of its fangs shook me to the core, long and sharp. They seemed to glow in the night. It howled, and was met with an echo of howling all around us. The sounds of dogs bellowing everywhere in the canyon twanged at my soul. It was an evil sound. The worst part, though, was what was just out of sight. The lights from our cars bathed the ground in front of us and illuminated the coyote, but on the edge of the light, my eyes caught multiple pairs of feet. There would be 10 people standing there behind the coyote, staring out of the light of our vehicles. Their skin was dark. It was dark and unnatural, like it wasn't really attached to the flesh, like it could slip off at any moment. Then, the feet then began to move towards us. From dark-skinned ankles covered with mud and paint, the light slowly illuminated the hunched-over figures. Their knees were scraped from rocks and dirt, their legs covered in blood. I couldn't bear to see the full figure, so I slammed my eyes shut and felt Liam shift his car into reverse. Liam backed out of the clearing as that we were parked in. The trees passed us, and I was sure I could see glowing eyes in the shadows. The way the legends go, that the skinwalkers, when they're human form, they would have the gaze of a beast. Their eyes would never match their bodies, always shining when they weren't supposed to be. We were backing up quickly, dangerously. I don't blame Liam for wanting out. He didn't even want in. As we broke through the tree line back into the sagebrush, Liam turned the car around on a patch of grass at the side of the road. He must have been seeing an owl fly past because he pointed it out and said that it was good that we left. Owls are observers, they're smart creatures, and they know when to leave when there's danger. So, we should leave. Now, is Jay behind us? Liam's voice was trembling and his fear was easy to feel. I'm sure that mine was, too. I remember looking back and seeing Jay's truck, but not before I see the man standing right behind the jeep. His eyes glowing white, skin painted black, wearing the skin of a mangled coyote. He had a sick grin on his face, a grin I'll never forget. His teeth were black and yellow, his body like a gnarled root. I screamed and ducked under the seat as his hand slammed against the metal frame. There were no words coming from his mouth, but we heard a howling, a dark howling, coming from the darkness. Liam knew it was time to stop asking questions, and he slammed on the accelerator. For a moment, we kept caring about Jay, Austin, and Danielle. We just wanted to get out of there. About 4 miles away from the tree line, Liam started to slow down. My heart was still beating furiously, and I was still huddled in the back seat of Liam's Jeep. It's okay. We aren't on reservation land anymore. We should be okay. His voice came slowly through long gasps for air. We drove until we reached the pavement and then stopped to wait for Jay. A few minutes passed and we saw his truck crest over the sagebrush behind us. My head flashed images of the eyes, brooding, waiting, thinking, floating in trees. It was so much darker out there than it was in the city. It was darker, but there wasn't any less light than where we were. It was the air itself that just felt dark. I parted my ways with Jay, Daniel, and Austin after I made sure that they got back to us safely. The ride with Liam was quiet, so I tried to pick the silence. Man, I thought frogs were good luck. I tried to joke with him, but Liam didn't respond. He pulled onto the street and drove me home. The silence bothered me. I felt bad for Liam because he didn't want to be there, and yet we talked him into going with us at work. He pulled up at my home, and then we parted ways. The next day, we all talked about the experience. I still didn't get a lot of information about them, so I left work and did a lot of research when I got home about skinwalkers. None of the natives wanted to talk about them, so it was hard to hear the local stories. I did find some interesting things online, though. They say that they have all of these poisons and dusts that they can use on you, or that they can take the shape of anything they consumed. Anything they've consumed. They say, when you lock eyes with one, it attaches itself to you, that it will follow you to your house. Try and break in, try and take you. They try and take you. All I think and think about is that coyote's eyes. They seemed so dead and empty. So here I am now. My dogs are barking downstairs and there's a knock at the door. Man. I thought frogs were good luck. Spooked! Thoroughly spooked. Okay, there's things in there that I wish that repeating of things that we already know is the main thing for me there. I just get I get frustrated when somebody repeats themselves over and over again. Lovecraft is horribly linked to this. He is terrible for it. But if you've said a thing, the reader will remember the thing. If you want the reader to be reminded of the thing, do it in a less, not subtle way. Just mention something like spooky. Okay, this guy's a spook junkie. Mention something spooky, and then mention his reaction to it, not, oh my god, I'm a spook junkie. We know this! Gosh darn, you said it! Jeez, whiz! And jeez, darn. I'm actually going to check what a skinwalker is, actually. I'm going to see if there are any pictures for it. Skinwalker. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into an animal or disguise themselves as an animal, usually for the purposes of harming people. Nice. Let's see some images. Ooh, that's frightening. That is not pleasant to look at. Ugh, hee-ha, hoo. That is scary. Well, it's a good thing that ain't real. See, the joke is that this is a spook zone, and I don't believe in spooky stuff sometimes. Ghosts don't exist. Lies don't exist. Okay, so I think one little short story will do us for the day, and then I will end the show there, and I will let things happen. So yeah, this next story is Flipbook. This is by Arm the Anon. Hopefully, this will do us good, and we'll enjoy ourselves. Yeah, let's get down to business. This is Flipbook. As a kid, I loved making flipbooks. They were all I did in art class whenever I had it. I worked really hard on one particular flipbook. It was about 50 pages long, I guess. It had a simple stick figure walking into the page, waving at me, and then walking off. I would look at least a dozen times the day that I made it, then it got boring. You know how kids are. Not entertained by one thing for very long. I tossed it under my bed and never gave it a second thought. A few months later, I was cleaning up my room and swept the stack of papers from out of my bed. Couldn't remember what it was. I flipped through it once and got the sweet taste of nostalgia. I flipped through it once more and noticed the pages hadn't aged or gained dirt at all. I flipped a third time. The little stick man walked onto the page, waved at me, but didn't walk off. Instead, a second stick man joined him. It waltzed up, having either an item in its hand or a severely disfigured arm. It's not like anyone could tell the difference. The second stick man walked onto the first stick next to the first stick figure, stood there a moment, then whacked him upside the head. The figure fell, and the second stick man swung his stick at the other man again and again. And again. What I assumed was its blood ran from the stick figure's rather jagged body. It looked nothing more than a smeared pencil stain. The killer stickman proceeded to bend down and tear apart its first stickman's body, limb by limb. Once he was done, he bent each one into characters and letters. He set them up on the page to form a single word. He grabbed the base of his own round head and tore it off. He then tore his legs and then one of his arms. He zigzagged, and his body parts formed themselves into a second word. What I read made me burn the flipbook. You're next. Oh wow, that's believable. That's the one issue with like short stories is you have to be able to still be convincing, but also be short. And a flip book that just moves and has no history to it, ooh, I'm believed. I'm scared. There's no evidence that this flip book can actually attack anybody apart from the things inside the pages. Ooh, I'm scared. I'm not actually. But oh well, we try to write some things sometimes, and sometimes, Just, you know? Oh god. Okay, I'm gonna read a comment which is way too mean. Don't like it had no build-up, and worse yet, it had no explanation of twist or any kind. Like it was some story about the narrator being crazy and then spending time redesigning the flip book with intricate carnage and then eventually being inspired to imitate it or something. Like, if there was some weird twist or adventure or something, it'd be good. But it was abrupt and without any sense, and it sucked. And we burned the book and we're done with it. The ashes didn't spell some cryptic evil message. Lame. 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10? You didn't even okay. If you're being completely negative with your criticism, you don't give something 3 out of 10. You give it a 0. If you're going to go all out on something, don't hold back. Don't be a nerd. Don't even be a nerd, because at least nerds wouldn't do something like this. Don't be like a what's the word for bad nerd? Is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as a bad nerd? I'm going to check. Nope, probably not. Anyway, but whatever it is, that's not criticism. If you want a critique, say what they did good also. Don't just give somebody a score. Stupid. Scores are dumb unless you explain why you're giving that score. 3 out of 10. IGN 7.8 out of 10. Too much water. That's a reference for all you people who like games out there. Oh well, that's fine. Sometimes we don't make Pablo Picasso when we're trying to write things. Sometimes it's always good to just write something anyway. As long as you're writing, I'm pleased with you, because writing's good. And writing like new stuff, it means that you'll just be doing that constantly, and one day you'll make a good thing. You know, one day you'll get there, and you'll make a good thing. That's great, because you know, good things are good. And bad things are bad. And I'm great at words. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this was the Spook Zone. I hope you all enjoyed yourself. Presumably you did. I mean, I know I did, so, you know. Well, why wouldn't you enjoy yourself also? Stupid. Well, you're not stupid, I love you. Anyway, thank you for watching, tuning in, and above all, stay spooked.